Sammy, thank you so much for that beautiful item. To see a brother and sister getting together and doing an item, that's so good. Thank you so much. Well, Chuck, I met you for the first time this morning. You gave us a pre-taste of what is to come. Many of us are looking forward to it. But before we do and have a couple of questions, I would like to embarrass your wife and your kids who are sitting at the back. Would you mind standing up? And that is Kelly and kids. Yes? Happy. Very good. So this is Chuck's wife and their 3 kids. We want to welcome you here. We already heard that you like Australia, so we can kind of, okay.
Yeah, they like it here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. You may be seated. Chuck, I did not try to pronounce your surname.
That's fine. It's officially Hagele.
Hagele. Now
yeah.
I can do it.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Kevin got in touch with me and he told me, you must have this guy. I said, okay. All right. Okay. Tell me more. Yeah. So we got talking about you, and I sensed that there is behind this a passion for what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I guess we are going to detect it once we start listening once again.
Yeah.
But I'll leave that to the service, so you will maybe tell us even more.
Yeah,
where is that
sure,
passion coming from and what's going on?
For sure.
But I hear that you ended up at the Phil show. How did that happen?
It's funny how different things happen that you aren't sure why. Our ministry works with at-risk teens, so boys and girls that are at that point of making really poor choices, behavior, emotional struggles. And there was this girl, young teenage girl, that we're trying to help to get into our program. Her father was trying to get her into our program. And unfortunately, the father had made some poor choices as a young man. And so his daughter and the daughter's mom, they never had a relationship. They just had a child together. And so the dad was trying to get her into our program, but we can't allow a child into our program without both consenting parents saying yes. And mom said, no, I'm not going to let my daughter go into the program unless Dr. Fell says she should go into the program. And
Funny.
So for us, we're like, okay, that sounds unlikely. And so on a Thursday afternoon, I got a phone call, and it was Dr. Fell's team. And I thought it was one of my staff members joking with me. And so I was trying to, you know how you're never quite sure. And in Australia, you joke around with people, and you're not sure if it's a joke or real. And so for this, I'm doing my very best to play along, but protect myself. You know how that goes.
Yeah, yes.
And pretty soon, I figured out it was for real. And then before you know it, on Monday morning, I was on an airplane. Tuesday, we were filming at Dr. Phil, and that girl came back into our program on that same trip. And so God used Dr. Phil to get a child into care, and she did really well in our program, and so we're thankful for that opportunity. But if you ever have a chance to go on a U.S. talk show, it is the worst experience you can imagine. It'll leave you feeling poor about yourself and scared, but God used that for a really amazing experience.
What you are doing, if I understand correctly, it's preparing kids for life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Life-ready kids. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you are passionate about and that you have researched and that you are going around to talk about, because we do live in time as we do. Yeah. And you can see destroyed lives, destroyed families, destroyed kids for multiple reasons. Tell us a little bit about those resources, because we are going to see you here for maybe less than an hour, and that will be it. Yeah. Tell us about your resources and what is it you're
So
doing?
the parent organization, I'm CEO of an organization called Project Patch. We work with at-risk teens, and it's a very intense 6 to 12 months with teens. And what we realized over time is that some of the things that we're doing with teens, parents would really be benefited from that as a preventative work. And so what can we get into parents' hands? What can we do for teachers, schools, pastors, so that they can minister to kids in a way that prevents them from needing our level of care? And then I met Kevin Mayevsky years ago when we were young men, I'd like to think. But we're at a conference called ASI, and it's when people that are in ministry, as well as church leaders, as well as business people, get together and talk about what's possible when we partner. And out of that, Kevin invited me to come out here to Australia, and we recorded a 12-part video series. It's 30-minute episodes designed around how do we talk about these things like pornography, video games, social media, and more than that, how do we raise a generation of kids that can thrive in this challenging time? And so we produced that set. It was pretty exciting, and then COVID happened. And so how do we get the word out about this material? And so that's partially why I've been here in Australia for this time with my family, is sharing that there's hope, sharing this resource. And so it's one of those things that we want to put resources into your hands, because we know you're working at a tough time right now, and technology is one of those things that a lot of families fight about. So how can we help teens? How can we help parents? And that's what we're doing here.
Great. Chuck, so after the service, all these parents who are here can come to you and talk to you about this resource, and you can let them know.
Exactly.
So you've heard me. So if you would like to get hold of some of the resources that will equip you as a parent, as a guardian, as an educator, please see Chuck afterwards.
Perfect.
So you're enjoying your trip here?
We're having a wonderful time. Yeah, we're having a wonderful time. We were able to go to the Currumbin yesterday and tour the hospital, and then we were able to hold koala bears, and that's just, I mean, it doesn't get much better than
You're
that.
not in heaven, but
it
gets close.
It's pretty close.
Yeah. Let me have a prayer with
Thank you.
Father God, I just want to thank you for the very specific and special ministry that Chuck has entered into and has dedicated his life to. And Lord, as there's so much heartache and brokenness, you are after people who will mend the minds and hearts, and who will bring others to the saving knowledge of Jesus and saving relationships with one another. So I pray for the blessing over him now, and I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Do you remember 1984? Anyone? Some of the kids weren't around then. I was a young man when 1984 happened. My father-in-law, Tom Sanford, was a pastor in this small community in Oregon. So the west coast of the United States. He was in the birthplace of windsurfing and kiteboarding and all those amazing things. Tom was a church pastor. And can you imagine a church pastor that has all sorts of people trying to give them their problems? You know, they've got a problem, and so they call Tom, the church pastor, to deal with it. And Tom loved teens. Teens knew that. Tom and Bonnie were working in the community, and their goal with their work in the community was, how can we keep kids from getting into more trouble? Even as a full-time pastor, they were seeing what they can do to help kids that were getting in trouble. You see, in the United States, we kind of have this thing where kids get in trouble, and before you know it, they're sent to court, and then they're given kind of an apprentice with other kids that are already in trouble to get into worse trouble. This system that didn't prevent stuff, but kind of punished kids and put them with more kids that were doing naughty things. And so Tom was frustrated. I'd say that was the case, is that he was doing what he can, and more people are calling him. And so Tom did what most people did in 1984. He took this device on his desk, and he started rolling through it. You know what he was working with? Anyone know? He was using a Rolodex. And for any of you know what a Rolodex is, your phone does that now. A Rolodex was a place where you put little cards of contact information in, and the worst thing to happen with the Rolodex was to drop it on the ground, because the cards would fly all over the place, and then you'd spend another hour, 2 hours putting them all back into your system of trying to find someone. So Tom's goal when he grabbed his Rolodex was, let me find someone else that can help all these people that are calling. Does that sound familiar? Remember Jesus? He's teaching on the mountain, and all these people are there, and the day is getting late, and his disciples came to him and said, Jesus, it's time to send the people away. This is the story of the 5,000 hangry men. Any of you get kind of hangry, angry, and hungry at the same time? I'm watching the clock because I know that hangry's coming if we're not careful. But the disciples are like, Jesus, send these people away, because if you don't, we're going to have a problem on our hands. We're going to have this problem with all these men, and we don't want that problem. It's interesting, isn't it, that first impulse that we have to send our problems away. Let's make it someone else's problem. Let's send them to the town. Let's send these people away. And Jesus said a shocking thing. Jesus said, you give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. And the disciples felt their pockets and they started to maybe not even exaggerate. They saw it clearly. Jesus, we don't have enough. Even if we could buy stuff, we don't have enough. The village wouldn't even be able to provide. Jesus, you're asking us to do something impossible. Have you ever felt that where it's like, Jesus, why are you asking me to do something that I have no capacity of doing? Similar to Tom sitting there, all these families are coming to him, and he's like, Jesus, I don't know what to do with all these. Can you send them to someone else? And Jesus is saying, you do something about it. What I love about that miracle with the 5,000 is that finally the disciples are like, I don't know what to do, and they probably started wandering around grumpily, muttering to themselves, and they encounter a little boy. And that little boy doesn't have much, but what he has, he says, I will give, right? I will give what I have. And so that little boy's fishes and loaves, Jesus blessed those. And then they started to feed the 5,000. Started to break it apart and serve. That first step of willingness turned into a blessing. Think about that. There was leftovers. There was leftovers. And for us as a ministry, for me as a second-generation leader of Project Patch, the ministry that took place, because Tom Sanford, that haggard pastor that was tired and exhausted, instead of just saying, let's find someone else to do it, he said, Jesus, I don't have much to offer, but I'm willing to step into kids' lives and offer what I can. Offer what I can. And then the miracle starts. You know, we wait for the miracle before we step out in faith, right? We want all the answers. We want everything to be clear. We want all everything, the road, the path ahead of us. And instead, Jesus says, I need you to take that first step of obedience. And then the blessings come. For us as a ministry that started in 1984, we started with this model of what can we do for kids, and God continues to expand it and bless it. So now we have this large facility in the mountains of Idaho, a staff of kids that provide counseling, school, education, chaplaincy. We work with kids. They stay on our campus and spend about a year, 6 to 12 months, learning how to do life again. And that's been an amazing ministry. And I look at that, and for us that's working into it, you know, Tom's retired now, but there's a generation of staff that continue to work in the blessing of Tom's obedience. Think about that. Something that happened in 84 that, yes, continues to bless us. As a ministry, we keep growing, and who would have thought that that little ministry, that pastor in Oregon saying yes would result in me being able to be here today, sharing hope. Not just hope, sharing confidence in a God that works miracles in people's lives. And I think we kind of need that reminder this morning is the fact that we're all facing challenges. We're facing stuff. We're facing giants. We're living at a time where it feels really difficult. You can kind of relate to that, right? Where you know that it's like every day it requires a lot of thought. It requires, you feel buffeted around. You feel insecure. You feel anxious. You feel sad about things. And we just want to keep moving forward in our life, but it seems really sluggish right now. It seems really difficult. We're living at a time, which I say is that we're fighting giants. It seems like every single day you're fighting the giant, and sometimes it's people that feel like enemies, but a lot of the times it's us, isn't it? We're fighting our thought life. We're fighting against our habits, against our addictions, against things that are in our character. And we say, you know, God, I feel so weak. Have you ever dealt with an addiction or some habit that every time you feel like you can stand against it, it just picks you up and moves you right back to where you started? Drops you back there again. And you make all the promises, and next thing it feels like this giant just has complete control of your life. We're living at a time where I think a lot of people did a lot of coping stuff during COVID. They were sitting at home feeling lonely, anxious, depressed, and so they built some habits, they made some poor choices, and they thought, as soon as COVID's over, I'm going to be fine because I'll be able to be in church, I'll be with my friends, everything's going to be fine again, and that addiction or that habit will be broken. But now we're finding that our habits are staying with us. We're struggling. We're also struggling with what I call thick walls, these dividing things between us and other people. Whether it's broken relationships, whether it's fear of letting people get close, whether it's this idea that we're afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to be connected, afraid to be dependent. So we've built up these walls between us and other people. We're living at a time of giants and thick walls. We feel it, don't we? We feel it all the time. And this morning I just want to, well, first of all, get my clicker working. Is it plugged in? It will work soon. I think just the little end piece needs to get plugged in. It's all right, it's awkward for me too, so we'll make it happen. It worked for Sabbath school, so it should get again. You want to try unplugging from the Mac that little fob thing and re-plug it back in? Will yours work? Okay, fantastic. This idea that John 10:10 is what I want you to think about real quick. Jesus said that what? The thief comes to three things: steal, kill, destroy. We feel that right now, right? We're at a time of loss. We're at a time of destroying, where we feel like even our brains, our minds, our relationship, these things are under destroying. But Jesus said, I have come that you might have what? Life, and have it to the full. Does it feel that way right now? Most of us aren't living in abundance. And I say that most of us look at this verse and we're like, well, someday when heaven comes, we're going to live in abundance, and it's going to be really awesome. It's going to be really awesome. Someday we'll have abundance. And what I want to challenge you this morning is, what would it be like if we take this verse seriously? Not just the bad stuff about the steal, kill, and destroy that we see happening right now, but what if we say, God, I'm living at a time that I could use you and I could use fullness. I could use life right now. But at the same time, how many of us are being robbed? How many of you feel like you're getting the sleep that you need? Or are you being woken up at night with racing thoughts? All the stuff that worries you, the relationships, the problems that you're dealing with, the uncertainty, what's going to happen next. And so you can't even sleep at night. You're being robbed of that. Instead of that freedom, you're spending time worried, not sure how to respond. How many of you have these things, these reminders that come back of all the stuff that you've done wrong or all the stuff that you've neglected to do? And so it's just like a constant brain attack of how bad you are, how wrong you are, how evil the choices you make, where shame just comes upon us. To me, that idea that we're living at a time of brokenness. Could you use some good news? Anyone? Some good news? There's amazing news found in Psalm 24, verse 14. This is a verse we kind of know. It says, and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony. And then what does it say? To all nations, and then the end will come. What is the gospel? What's the gospel that's mentioned right there? The gospel, the good news. We know that word, right? What's the good news that needs to be preached? About Jesus? I love how when we're in a church environment, we can pretty much say Jesus, and it counts for almost any question, right? It's kind of a broad answer, and so it's almost too broad of an answer, because when we say Jesus is good news, that's true, right? When we say Jesus died for our sins, that's good news. When we say Jesus is coming back, that's great news. But here's the thing, is that when you look at that verse, it says the gospel, and then it's got a little descriptor of it, gospel of the kingdom, I remember I was in History of Latin America class at Walla Walla University. Every single class period, we'd have this extended reading list of all these historical things that were happening, and then you'd walk into class and he'd write down a question on the board, and you'd have your essay book, and you had 10 minutes to write an essay to answer that question. And one of the days I came in, I was feeling so confident. I did all the reading. I sat down, took out my book, and I had the essay in front of me, and I wrote the essay out, and it was beautiful. I felt, there's times that you just feel like so anxious and you feel so good that it's like, I am going to get praise from the teacher. The teacher is probably going to frame this up as the example of the greatest essay ever written in class. I'm probably going to get a new seat in class where all the other students can like adore me, like think I'm amazing. That essay was so good that I had written. I had the supporting argument, I made all the points, I made the summary, I felt so great, and I turned it in with confidence. The next time I came back to class, I got my book back, and I was ready for all the great notes from the teacher, and it said 0/10. That's not good. But what it said next to it is just so funny years later. It said, great essay, wrong person. Great essay, wrong person. As in, I was so quick to write the essay that I did not carefully read the question. I made an assumption in reading the question, and so I wrote a wonderful essay about the wrong thing. I did the wrong task. And so here's the important thing. When you read this verse, it says the gospel of the kingdom is to be preached as a what? As a testimony. As a testimony. What I find fascinating about that is how many of us are kings? Any of us kings here? Some of us are kings. You're just king of a small kingdom. Let's just say that. What I say is a king is only king as far as you have power and authority. Okay? I have power and authority only so far. And so for any of us looking at the battles right now, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia? Russia wants to own Ukraine, so they're exerting what? Power. But the battle is that Ukraine is exerting their power, and so the lines are unclear at this point. And so think about me. I've got power and authority only for a certain place. This morning, I would like a lot of power and authority, because if I have power and authority over you, I can collect taxes. I would love to be a tax collector where I could just go down the rows and just say, you owe me this much, and pay it now. But if I tried to collect taxes from you, you would say to me what? You have no authority to collect taxes. You can't collect taxes, and even if you did, I wouldn't pay them to you, and you can't make me, right? You can't make me. And so when you look at kings having power and authority, that's what Jesus is talking about. There's a testimony about a place in which Jesus has power and authority. Power and authority. You start looking at the verses, and I think it's kind of interesting because you have certain verses in the Bible that we read really carefully. And when we think about kingdom of God, we think kingdom of heaven. Okay? We get kind of confused. Matthew starts swapping the words around quite a bit, and we start missing out because we think that's coming someday. Okay, read through your Bibles. We're going to fly through these verses, but the Beatitudes, the first one in verse 3, Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Did you catch that? When is that now or in the future? That's now, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The next verse, verse 4, just as an example, says, blessed are those who mourn, for they, what? Will be comforted. That's talking about a future act of comforting. At the very bottom, verse 10 comes back again, and it said, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs, what? Is the kingdom of heaven. It's important for us to read through that, and it's kind of interesting. When you think about someone being poor, how much power and authority do they have? If you're poor, you really can't exert power. You're hit by every force that comes in. You're powerless. And if you're poor, you really have to depend on God completely. So you depend on His power and authority because you have none. Does that kind of make sense? And so if you are poor in spirit, you're like, God, I don't have it in my spirit. I need to depend 100% on you. You've just entered God's kingdom. The very bottom one where it said, blessed are those who are persecuted. Can you imagine when you're persecuted, you're losing everything, including possibly your life. You're losing your health, you're losing your job, you're losing because you have no power to hold it. Does that mean what? I need to depend on God's power because I have none. You know, the other verses that I think are really interesting when it comes to this is this idea of the mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. What's the mustard seed worth? It's not even a blessing to a bird, right? Because it's such a small snack. And what God is saying, and what Jesus is saying, is that the mustard seed planted into ground over time grows and becomes a blessing in which birds land in it. That's a long process, isn't it? That's a long process. And so it says the kingdom takes time to grow. It starts small and it keeps expanding. It keeps getting bigger and bigger. Another illustration of that, the kingdom of God is like yeast put into bread. When you read through that verse, when you put yeast into a tiny bit of bread, what happens with that yeast? It keeps growing. What's crazy about the Bible is if you actually read through the amount of bread that's being made, this is like a big pizza for the whole community. I mean, it's this massive amount of dough that's being made. And we forget that it's like, how can all that dough rise? It's because yeast keeps spreading and keeps spreading. You know, one of the mistakes that I've made as a Christian is that, especially when I was young in Sabbath school, even as a young man, it was really common for us to make a list of our priorities. What comes first in our life? God comes first, right? What comes second? Family, spouse, kids, work, ministry. We kind of make lists of what's important. And for some reason, we think that God would be flattered because we put him at the top of the list. And when we read these two verses, especially that idea about yeast, is that God doesn't want to be in the top of the list. He wants to be through the list. He wants to be a part of it all. And so for us, we've got like this part of my life is for God, and then the rest of the week I work, I do fun, I do all these other things. And God's like, I want to be a part of all of that. I want to rule you on Sabbath, and I want to rule you during the week because that's what's best for you. That's what's best for you. What's kind of strange is that for us, we draw lines of where God is king. We might say for spiritual things, but what about our sexuality? What about our relationships? What about our ambition, our work? Is God in it and through it? Is he king? Kind of a strange thought to think about. You know, one more example of it is I love the Lord's Prayer. When you read through the Lord's Prayer, we kind of don't take time to envision what it means. It says, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Can you picture heaven's throne scene where the throne's right there and angels surround the throne? And as soon as God says, I need someone to, do you think the angels lean in? And they're like, someone to go to earth, and they're already running. They're eager to do what God has to do because it's exciting when God asks you to do something, right? There's something in store that it's like, I want to be a part of that. For us, if we're honest, if God says, I want you to do something, we're like, just a minute, I'm on my phone, you know? Just a minute, I've got something else. Or we're distrustful of God. God, please don't make me. Or if you're going to make me a missionary, send me to Australia. You know, that'd be awesome. Don't make me go there. We've got a fear of what God calls us to do because we feel like we're going to lose out, that we're going to miss out. So when God says, you know, when Jesus prays that your kingdom on earth will be like heaven, that means that our hearts are so excited about obeying God. We're eager to obey because there's so much good that happens when we obey. Anyone here ever want to be a spy? Grow up wanting to be a spy? Come on, the worship team, you know. It'd be so, yeah, you want to be a spy? I thought a spy would be the greatest thing ever to be a spy. And so when I read through Numbers 13, I think it's got to be one of the most exciting chapters in the Bible because you had 12 people picked from all the different tribes. The children of Israel had left Egypt. They had come through the Red Sea. They had gone to Mount Sinai. They had taken their time, but they're finally standing with their toes in the river, and on the other side is the Promised Land. Can you picture it? They're so close from desert on one side to the Promised Land on the other, and they're just getting ready to cross it, and God directs them to have people go as spies. What's interesting is that they went for 40 days. Those spies were gone for 40 days. Can you imagine sneaking around for 40 days? You're watching. If you look at the maps, and I tend to read my Bible so quickly, I kind of skip over the place names. If you look at the place names, they zigzagged all the way across that region. They went everywhere. They were exploring. I love that idea. I mean, that sounds way better than any kind of video game. And so they're wandering around, looking around. And when they get back, they've got this beam across two of their shoulders. And on it are the biggest grapes people can imagine. They brought pomegranates back. They brought all this stuff. And can you imagine those guys strutting? like just walking in, and all the people just hush. They're watching that. They've been eating manna for a while, and the idea of fresh fruit sounds so good. I like peaches. Anyone like peaches or nectarines? You know, the kind that you can't eat indoors, and you're going to, like, it's just the messiest fruit ever, but it tastes so good. Can you imagine? They're watching this fruit come in, and they know there's a story to tell. They wander in with this, and then they make their full report. All 12 of them, including Joshua and Caleb, they all agree on what they see. This is where you find it in Numbers 13. We went into the land to which he sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak. Okay, so first of all, they saw a land of milk and honey. Any of you work in real estate? Do you ever write a brochure for your property and say, this is a real nice property. It's a 4-bedroom house with bathrooms, and it's in the milk of honey land? It doesn't make much sense, right? We don't describe like, oh, how was your vacation over in Hawaii? Well, it's a land of milk and honey. It's beautiful. We don't use that phrase a whole lot, do we? It's kind of antiquated, but what it means, for you to have a milk, that means the babies are being born. The sheep are being born. They're safe enough to be born. So it's a land of growth. What about bees? In the United States, we've had a collapse of the hive. Have you heard about that? I don't know if Australia's had that. The hive collapses. That means the bees are dying. Why are the bees dying? It could be temperatures, it could be pesticides, it could be this, it could be that. It's a real complex thing that causes the hives to collapse. We're not living in a time of milk and honey. We're living in a time of pestilence, floods. We're living at a time of chaos and brokenness, okay? But they were going into the land that God said, this is really good, and when they went, it was really good. And then the other problem, there's large cities, and then there were descendants of Anak. That sounds like thick walls and giants, doesn't it? And so all of them saw that, and what's interesting is that the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack the people because they are stronger than we are. Even Joshua and Caleb, they're like, we can't attack these people, we can't do it. It's a battle that we can't win because they're bigger than they are, they're well fortified, we don't have the ability to do it. Kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? But here's where it got a little different. 10 of them decided that it was the very worst thing imaginable. 10 of them said, if only we had died in Egypt, in the wilderness, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? Can you believe how sad that would be? You're right there on the edge of something amazing, and you go back to slavery. You go back to a place without control. You go out to a place where you're a victim. You go back to the bad. We talked this morning in Sabbath school about the human brain. The human brain likes what? Predictability. Does slavery offer predictability? We like to know what's sure. They knew what life was like back there, but they don't know what life forward looks like. They were scared. They were scared. They know they can't fight giants. They know they can't break down walls. And so at that point, they're like, I know that I can be a slave. I don't think I can do that next step. I don't think I can do the next thing. And so at that point, they took up rocks. They were ready to kill Moses. They were ready to kill Caleb. They were ready to kill Joshua. The verse that I find interesting is as you start looking through what Caleb and, Joshua said to them. Joshua said, if the Lord is what? Pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, the land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Who's going to attack the giants? Who's going to break down the walls? They knew that they couldn't do it. They knew that God could do it. But here's the problem, is that there's that battle there. They're getting ready to destroy Joshua, Caleb, and Moses, and the light shone, and God told them that they are not going to take one step closer into that land. Instead, they're going to turn around, and they're going to wander aimlessly in the desert. A whole generation's going to die and be left in the sand and never get to the land of milk and honey. Is that kind of crushing? How many of you feel like you're at that point that you know you have to take that next step of faith, but instead you aren't sure to do it, and you end up living lives that kind of wander aimlessly? What's my purpose? What's my plan? Why am I here? And you're just kind of wandering around in the desert when all the while you know where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be in that land of God, that land of promise, but instead we're wandering around. Can you imagine 40 years later, they're at that exact same spot? What the spirit of prophecy in the Bible tells us is at this point, the people on the other side are larger, there's more of them, and they've lost their fear of the people of God. They don't fear the people of God anymore. They're standing there. The challenge has just gotten bigger. Do you feel that way with your challenges, with your addictions, with your separations? That just because you chickened out or you kind of tried to handle it yourself, that the problems keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger? And so they're there with even bigger problems this time. They're standing there at the edge, and this time they step into the water. Partway through, they collect rocks. These rocks are symbols of all the things that God has done. They pile them so that generations from now they can say, hey, we can't feed ourselves, God fed us. We can't do this stuff, God can do it. We can't even cross the land, but this is a place that God separated the waters and we walked into it. And so imagine now they're here, they're on the other side, they've got an altar there, and now God says, I'm going to reveal how you deal with giants. I'm going to tell you how to deal with thick walls. They marched. And then the next day they marched. And the next day they marched. And on Sabbath they marched how many times? 7 times. And then God did his thing, right? Boom, walls came down. Walls came down. Giants fell. They went into battles against strong giants, and then later on, the giants would get into confusion. Can you picture that? They're like, yay, let's go fight. And by the time they get to the battle, the giants have killed each other. They've killed each other. Do you walk away from a battle like that saying, I did it, I killed people, I'm the most amazing swordman ever? Or do you like, God, wow. Thank you for sparing me from having to do that. Thank you for going before me. Thank you for going before me. Thank you for fighting a battle that I couldn't fight. Thank you for that. What's interesting is the children of Israel forgot really quickly, right? There's a battle recorded in Numbers in which they're like, we can do it. We're awesome army people. And they went into army without asking for God's presence, without asking for God's permission. And what happened? They were slaughtered. They had a defeat. And so early on, they have to remember that I can't do it, but God can. God can. That's a real change for most of us. This idea that I can't do it. This world really has this idea that all of us need to get to the point that I can do it. Whatever challenge you face, I can do it. This confidence that says, I can do anything if I put my mind to it. Is that true? No. That's a falsehood. We can't do it. I'm going to kind of play a game that I heard from a professor at Fuller Seminary. He said that if you listen carefully to an Australian word, you'll pick up a really important point. Americans say, I can't do it. That doesn't sound right. When Australians say it, it sounds a little bit different. I need you to say, I can't do it. Can you say that? Together, I can't do it. Can you say it? I can't do it. I can't do it. Do you start hearing another word called conduit? You know what a conduit? A conduit is like a pipe that takes water from here and takes it to where it needs to go. A conduit. A conduit doesn't have any power of its own. It takes something from the source of power and takes it to the place of need. So when we say, I can't do it, I can't do it, that's the place that God says that's the perfect place to be because that's when I can work through you. When you say, I can do it, you're blocking off God's power, God's authority, God's kingdom, because you say, my power, my authority are enough in this case, and your power and your authority aren't going to get you anywhere when it comes to giants and walls. God says that my power flowing through you can take down walls in ways that you can't imagine. It can destroy giants in ways that you can't imagine, but it's all up to who? It's all up to God. I can't do it is one of the most beautiful places. I love this verse. John 15:5 says, I am the vine. What are we? We are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You can do nothing. That's an important part for us to get to, is that fact that I can't do anything separated from him. Look at this line real quick. This is another brain twister from this morning. How many of you see, and I should have had one more line, the animation's not working, but that's fine. Go back one more. If you look at the place with the X, it looks straight, doesn't it? If you look away from the X, what do you see? Wavy lines, things that don't look as straight. One of the things that I think is most amazing about how God, he knows we're living in a place of confusion. He knows we're living at a place where we don't know which way is truth, that we get confused all the time. And so he gives us direction that helps us. Matthew chapter 22 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That's like a complete love, isn't it? This is the first and greatest commandment. So if you imagine that first thing, when we love God with all, fully commit, things get clearer. We know more about what we're supposed to do. And then the second line is what? Love our neighbor. Serve each other. Care for each other. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so when we have love of God and when we have love and service of other people, what you'll find is that your life gets much more clarity. What do I need to do? What's my life purpose? What is my, and God starts speaking to you in really clear ways. Really clear ways. Trying to click here, and I apologize. Okay. We think about love, and we're kind of tired of hearing about it, and we forget just how important it is to us. For most of the teens I work with, they want a solution that is like, okay, I need to just do this, I need to do that, and everything's going to fall in place. And what we say is that, yeah, you do need to learn some new skills, you need to see counselors, you need to do some of these things, but your ability to start loving others is power. God is giving you power into your life. This morning we talked about what? That perfect love casts out fear. Even imperfect love, even human love, starts casting out some fear. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Can you imagine being a little kid? Your dad's down below and says, jump. I've got you. I'm here for you. And instead we're just like, I'm not sure. That's really scary looking down. I'm not sure that you have the best in mind for me. I'm not sure that your power and authority can catch me. I want to protect myself. And so we're standing on top watching down, and God's like, God, please jump. You can do this. You can do this. I remember watching on a chairlift. We were going up a chairlift at a ski slope, and there's a little boy that was skiing by himself, and he had no poles, and he was skiing, and he was going faster and faster, and his dad was right next to him. And they were skiing down the hill, and the boy started getting more and more scared, and he started going faster and faster, and he finally said, Dad, I could sure use some help over here. Which I thought was so awesome, because it's like, Dad, I need you because I'm doing something really scary right now. I need you. And God is saying, this is the place I want you to be. You know, we're living at a time right now where the world needs good news. The world needs good news. They need a testimony. Can I leave an accurate testimony of something I've never experienced? Can I write a review of a country I've never been to? Can I describe a meal I've never eaten? There's no power in that, is there? There's no truth in that. And so for me to describe something I've never done and say, that's really great, that doesn't make much sense. And so God is saying right now to us in this room that He has given us a chance to give a testimony of His power and His authority. Our story of what happens when we give up ourselves and God starts fighting for us. That's good news. Is it easy to tell those stories? Most of us hide our mistakes. Most of us pretend like we're fine. And what I want to tell you this morning is that this is a chance for God to start breaking down your walls. If you're fighting giants, God is saying, I really want to fight for you and with you, but you're going to have to trust me on this one. For some of you, it's time that you share your story of what God's done in your life, not just the happy parts, but the realization that other people need to know that God has power over things like pornography. God has power over video games. God has power over broken relationships. God has power over all things. He's a good God. He's willing to fight those battles. And for people that are in the midst of a battle, they need to know that God is able and he's capable and he's willing. But that takes us being vulnerable. That takes us being what? Open to saying, I had no power over this, but God did a good thing. Have you ever thought about how kids learn how to ride bikes? Imagine a child on a bike and they're scared because it's wobbly, it's uncomfortable. And so they have one foot on the pedal and they grab the other foot onto the pedal really quick and they try to balance as best they can. And what happens when you try to balance without the bike moving? Fall over, right? And so you try it again, and when you fall over, it hurts, and so this time you're going to be more careful, and so you try to get your balance as best you can, and you can only balance so long if you're not moving. And the whole time you've got God saying, it's time for you to move. It's time for you to move. Not just being the kind of Christian that just wants to get everything in balance before you move, but God's saying it's time for you to start moving into the world. Sharing the good news of the fact that his kingdom is able and it's powerful and it's needed this very day. I don't know where your commitment is, but as we sing this last hymn together, as we prepare to close this service, my challenge for you is that there's giants and there's thick walls, and it's time that they come down, and you can't do anything about it, but God can do everything about it. Everything about it. Let's sing our